You're on.
Yeah.
Indran sir is here.
Yeah. Lata ma'am is also here. No one pays. This is always. Yeah.
That is always good.
Is this Lata from Singapore?
Stella.
No.
Okay, okay.
From Chennai.
Okay.
Mamta Sagar ma'am is also here. You can all can chat with you can look at the attendee list and you can all chat to them.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You don't see them yet, right?
Yes.
It is a webinar format, Gopika, because it becomes difficult if people don't mute themselves for things. It becomes difficult, so we just host it in the. They can see you, you can't see them. It's that way.
Okay.
I understand.
Participants list and kind of anyone you can say hi to them and things like that. Harish, let's start at 7 sharp. Harish, let people join it. Okay? All the best. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If everybody is ready, quickly can we turn the video on because we missed Hema ma'am the last time. On your best smiles. Mangai ma'am, can you turn your video on? Yes. Let me know when you're all ready. All good? Thank you. All right, I'll be in the back end. You can message me anytime you want, or you can just call out my name and I'll respond back if you need anything. Thank you. Have a good evening. Meera, I'm going to start 7 o'clock.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay. Welcome everybody. We are glad you could join us. Prakriti Foundation is an arts and culture NGO in Chennai, founded in 1998, and it has been a space where scholars, researchers, artists, critics, poets, filmmakers have been able to present their work to those who engage with it on serious terms. One of its 4 annual festivals, Poetry with Prakriti, features eminent and emerging poets from India and abroad, presenting to small, intimate audiences at several venues in the city. Like schools, colleges, cafes, galleries, boutiques, banks, IT parks, green public parks, and other commercial establishments. Due to travel and public gathering restrictions, Poetry with Prakriti is online this year, with readings on the first 3 Saturdays of every month, bringing you poetry via your computer or smartphone screen. We are mindful of the video conferencing fatigue, so these are shorter events, around 15 minutes of reading followed by Q&A sessions with the poet. However, this week we have a book launch. We will all hear soon. And now we will take questions after the reading or after the discussion. Feel free to chat with each other and comment in the chat section. But questions for the people on the panel must only be typed in the Q&A section. You can access it in the tab below, not in the chat box. Please keep your questions brief and, if possible, directly connected to what is being read and talked about in the discussion. We'll try to take all the questions that come up, that may not be possible due to time restrictions. Thank you so much. Now I invite Dr. Hema to start the session officially. Thank you.
Thank you, Harish. Good evening, all the wonderful writers and the panelists here. I thank Prakriti for this wonderful opportunity that it has been giving our college and our students. On behalf of the management, principal, staff members, and students of the English department of SDNB Vaishnav College, I take it a very great privilege to invite you all to this program. Thenir Murangalin Kalavai Kavithayum Oviyamum. Tea, a concoction of dissonance, poetry and art. The book launch here this evening. I welcome all of you on behalf of our college, and I take it as an opportunity to introduce Geetha Sukumaran, a Tamil poet and a bilingual translator, who has published Tharkolaikku, parakkum, panithuli, Tamil translation of Sylvia Plath's poems, the poetry collection of Otrai, pakadaiyil, enchum, nampikkai, the whole, set in a single die, and an English translation of Ahilan's Then There Were No Witnesses. She received the SPARROW R Thyagarajan award for her poetry. She is a doctoral student in Humanities at New York University. I welcome you. And then Bhagyanathan Ahilan is a senior lecturer in art history at the University of Jaffna and currently reading for his PhD at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India. He has published 3 collections titled Padungukuri Natkal in 2001 and Saramakavihal in 2011 and Ammai in 2018. He is also the author of his essay collection Kalathin Vilimbu, Yalpanatin Marabu Urimayum, Avatrai Padukaathalum in 2015, and the co-editor of Reading Sri Lankan Society and Culture, volumes 2 and 3 in 2007 and 8 in Tamil, and Venkata Swaminathan, Vadangalum, Vivadangalum in 2010 in Tamil. English translation of his poems, Then There Were No Witnesses, was published in 2018. Vaidehi received an MA in Fine Arts in Painting from MS University in Baroda, India. Currently, she is a teacher. She teaches art at an international school in Chennai. She is also a freelance artist. Ahilan sir and Vaidehi ma'am, I welcome you to this program. And Vidhya Sreenivasan is a poet and translator, rendering Tamil in English. She is an avid follower of the Indian performing arts and a trained singer herself. She believes in the power of the lyrical to tease one out of tedium and routine and engage endlessly in possibility. Writings on bhakti and mysticism particularly interest her. She has previously published her translations of Geetha Sukumaran's poetry and Dilip Kumar's short stories in the web journal, The Beacon, and currently teaches English in Chennai. I welcome you for this program. Gopika Jadeja has recently completed a joint PhD with National University of Singapore and King's College London. She is currently working on a monograph based on her doctoral research. She is editor-at-large Singapore for Vasafiri and part of the editorial team of the journal PR and TA, Practice Research and Tangential Activities, a journal of creative practice with a focus on Asia based in Singapore. I welcome you, ma'am, for this program. She is a bilingual poet writing in English and Gujarati. Gopika is a recipient of the Charles Wallace Scholarship for Creative Writing. Her poetry and translations have been published in Modern Poetry in Translation, Asymptote, Cha, and Asian Literary Journal, Kodai Poetry Review, Indian Literature, the Four Quarters Magazine, The Wolf, the Sahacharya Vahi, etc. Gopika is working on a project of English translations of poetry from Gujarat, including Dalit and Adivasi poetry. She currently lives and works in Singapore. I welcome you, Gopika, also to this program. I request Mangai ma'am to initiate the launch.
Welcome everyone for this beautiful rainy evening. It's at least raining in Chennai, Singapore, and Bangalore, as far as I know. I don't know where else it's raining. So though it might seem like a ritual, I think it's a very happy ritual of celebrating a certain collective, creative spirit at hand. And Ahilan is beginning it with the teacup in his hand. So let's, those of us who have the book with us right now, let's hold it to the camera, and that would be the launch of the book. Yeah. As you can see, it's almost a tabletop book with paintings and the poems which are on the side, and it is bilingual. So I think it's a very unique effort that one would like to emulate and treasure. And so happy launching of this concoction of dissonance. Thank you. I mean, I just want to kind of keep that note of concoction, because I don't think any Western media would use it for making tea, you know. And there is a poem by Geetha which really talks about how it's very different making tea here. And those of us who are used to having a masala chai would know what it really means on a rainy day. So this is a concoction where many loose colors, there's a new color that is evolving, and it is dissonance. It is dissonance. Usually one thinks that you think against the current, and the image is usually going against the stream. But I think when you're doing it in literature, arts, and in everyday social system, the dissonance is always almost collective. And I think we have a really lovely team of creative artists and a critical reader that Gopika is, who really brought out so many truths from Gujarat for those of us who remember. And I'm extremely happy that this bonding that is built over so many years is going to see the light of day in this creative format. With these few words, we're just going to have the presentation by the artists involved, the artists, the poets, and the translator, followed by the response that Gopika would give, and then a kind of a mini panel discussion, and throw it open to a Q&A. Please feel free, like Harish said, to put your questions down, to put your comments that you want to put in the chat, and keep sharing. Let's just make the best use of this space that's given to us. Yeah, so can I invite Vaidehi to actually begin the whole experience, sharing of experience of sorts, because I think the whole project evolved from her painting of the teacups and Ahilan's many days of spending time at Vaidehi's house, which has been like a 20-year-long relationship for them when they were students in Baroda. So Vaidehi?
Vanakkam, and good evening to you all. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you that we have reached this stage. Yeah. So I would like to talk about moments of drinking tea are both personal and meditative. Something that happens in the instant impels me towards an act of creativity. When I started drawing, these were the teacups that held nostalgic memories. Later, the cups underwent metaphorical changes, and then they became the body. A body that repeatedly performs everyday activities. Simultaneously, a body that woke up in banality of the everyday and yet is trapped within that. Now, the teacup transforms itself into a female body. It becomes my body, myself, and then the surrounding entirely becomes part of it, holding it together while melding with it. The creative act is a journey with a stranger where the self is occupied with the self. It is an inward journey. Art captures the moments of life preventing us from drowning in them. The fluidity of life has been encapsulated in this still life lighting and arrangement in my work. Monotone is used deliberately to add depth to the art. Ma'am, it is muted.
Thank you so much for bringing the mundane and the meditative together with equal importance. And I think they are of equal importance. However much we think the mundane is lesser, it is never less. Thank you so much. It's really, really beautiful. Let's just experience the poems first. We'll do Ahilan and then Geetha. Ahilan will read in Tamil and Vidhya would read the translation so that you get the language part. I can see many of our friends from different languages who have joined in this event. So I'm sure it'll be a treat for us. Also remember, this is Tamil, but it is from Sri Lanka, Tamil Nadu, and Toronto. Yeah, Ahilan. Ahilan Padingo.
Oh, sorry. There is some interruption. Sorry. So this collective work took off from the visual representation of Vaidehi's tea, or the tea works, the works related to tea. So the first poem, தேநீரை திறக்கிறேன் இன்று இலார் தடயமற்றார் தொலைவிடம் சென்றார் ஆயிரம் ஆயிரம் உறவு முறிந்தார் முகங்கள் மிதந்து வர தேநீரிலும் அருகிறது இதயம்.
Vidya, can we listen to the translation?
I'm sorry, I got disconnected.
Yeah, Ahilan has read his first poem.
The first poem.
Right, sure, sir. Yeah. So I'll just be going on to read the English translation. I uncover my tea. The ones who aren't here today have gone far away and severed thousands and thousands of bonds, leaving no trace behind. As their faces come floating by, the heart detaches itself, even from tea.
பேறுகால மடிப்பு வரிசை அட்டைகள் உறிஞ்சி கருத்த நூறாயிரம் அடுக்கள் கொழுந்து கூடைகள் முறித்த எலும்பு தோள்களால் தேயிலை சாயம் தின்ற இரத்த விரல்களால் தேயிலை கோப்பை சுவர்களில் புதிதாக ஒரு தேசப்படம் அவள் உடல்.
The many stretch marks of pregnancy, 100,000 black scars, where the leeches have sucked, shoulders cut to the bone by wicker baskets, and bloodied fingers gnawed away by tea stain, her body. A new map traced on the walls of the teacup.
இங்கே உள்ளேன் தேநீரும் நானுமாய் காலமும் காட்சிகளும் கரைகின்றன நீராகி புகாராகி இப்போது நான் இல்லை தேநீர் இல்லை இங்கே எதுவுமே இல்லை.
Here I am, tea and me. Moments and images dissolve, becoming now water, now mist. Now I'm not here. Neither is tea. Nothing remains.
Thank you, Ahilan. Can we move on to Geetha?
கலிபோர்னியா, சிங்கப்பூர், லண்டன் எல்லா நகரங்களிலும் தேநீர் கோப்பையை பற்றும் உடல்கள் தேடுகின்றன. பரிச்சயமான எலும்பின் வடிவங்களை, தோலின் மடிப்புகளை, கண்களில் தழும்பும் ஊரின் மீதத்தை.
California, Singapore, London. In all parts, bodies gripping teacups search, for familiar curves of bone, folds of skin, for the remnants of home welling in their eyes.
காலை நேர கிணற்றடியின் தோய்க்கும் கல்லில் அமர்ந்து சுக்கும் கொடிமிளகும் கலவி கொள்ளும் தேநீர் பெருங்காட்டை அருந்துகையில் அழைக்காதே, தேவதையாகிக் கொண்டிருக்கிறாள் அம்மா.
Morning, at the well, perched upon the washing stool, when she drinks the great forest of tea where pepper, wine, and ginger meet, do not call her. Amma is becoming an angel.
கூடத்தில் தேநீரை தந்த பின் மீண்டும் சோம்பும் ஆரஞ்சு தோலும் தேயிலையோடு அவியும் சமையல் அறையில் முள்ளந்தண்டிலிருந்து இடுப்பின் வியர்வையிலிருந்து பெயரும் கதைகளை அவர்கள் அருந்தினர் ரகசியமாய்.
Tea had been served in the hall. Then, in secret, they sip the stories down with sweat from the spine and the hip in the kitchen, where again, fennel and orange peel simmered with tea leaves.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this is just a glimpse, and I know there are all these difficulties of the technical stuff that we are using, the space itself. But as you can see, it begins with the recent colonial history of the tea gardens to the people who are living away from home with memories of home. So somewhere all these records are expanding what is personal and the mundane that Vaidehi began with, and is really kind of extending the complexities that are involved in all of our lives spread all over the world. I'm sure Gopika has a lot to share with us, and she would have read them as English poems. And I'm really looking forward to Gopika's comments. Gopika.
Thank you, Mangai. And thank you so much for starting off, for flagging off this collective making of this concoction. Thank you, Vaidehi, for your beautiful drawings and for bringing out the extraordinary, for bringing out the insights that you from the mundane, from the everyday. Thank you, Ahilan and Geetha, for inviting me to share in your concoction of dissonance. And thank you, Vidya, for the lovely translations. And of course, when I read these poems, I see them mostly through your eyes. I see them through the translator's eyes as words on the page that are written in English. And that is why I think it was such a great experience for me to listen to the sound of the Tamil. So thank you also for reading in both languages. And then thank you, of course, to Prakriti for hosting this book launch. You know, I have, over the past few years, come to know both Ahilan's poetry and Geetha's work, both her poetry and her translations. You know, Ahilan wears many hats. You know, he's an art critic and historian. He's doing his PhD. He's a poet. He's a teacher. So it's no surprise to me that this collection of poetry began over a set of drawings and, of course, copious cups of tea. The drawings and the poems in this collection, I think, are as much about time, memory, and the everyday as they are about political and about the political in the quotidian, about the political in the everyday. These poems were conceived over tea, but they're also poems that interrogate the nature of human relationships that are built over these cups of tea, about over the ritual of making a cup of tea and over the ritual of drinking a cup of tea. So, you know, my first response to these poems is as a poet. And then, of course, the poems and the drawings themselves, which are you know, face to face in the collection. You know, for those of you who haven't seen the book, this is what they look like, and you know, the poems and the drawings speak beautifully to each other. So my first response then to this book as a whole, to the drawings, to the poems and the translations, is a poet's response, drawing from my memory of tea. And one of my earliest memories of tea is as a child. My mother used to take me to the market on her monthly shopping trip to the old city of Rajkot. And Rajkot, as many of you would know, is in Gujarat. And the one claim to fame that Rajkot, well, two, I would say, claims to fame that Rajkot has is that Rajkot has a cricket stadium. And it was the place where Gandhi spent his childhood. And this market that I went to with my mother, was very close to Gandhi's childhood home. And one of the rituals that we had when we went to the market, when we went on the monthly shopping trip, was to go to the old tea shop. It was a small shop with a small facade, with chests of tea at the back, and this blackboard with its writing on chalk listing all the teas that were available and the prices of the teas. And when we got to the head of the queue, what my mother would ask for is a mix of two types of tea, what the shop labeled green spot and mamri in Gujarati, which is a mix of whole leaf tea and CTC tea. So the whole leaf for flavor, and the CTC for the, the whole leaf for the flavor and the CTC for the color. And anyone who drinks tea will know that this is a very popular combination, besides, of course, the masalas that you would add. And this, of course, is something I remembered when I read Ahilan's poem about the conversation between the man and the woman talking about the many shades of menstrual blood. So tea reminds me of the old city of Rajkot and the dissonances that I have felt growing up in Gujarat, especially over the past couple of decades since, and particularly since 2002. I wanted to read you a poem about this, but since this is, so there are two constraints. One, of course, is that this is about this book, about tea, and also that it is going to take up too much time and take me away from the work that we have before us. So what I will do is I will share the link to what I wanted to read out to you in the chat later. Now, knowing Ahilan's poetry and knowing Geetha's writing and translations, I'm not at all surprised that this collection evokes dissonance and that it is dedicated to the tea plantation workers, for the history of tea, and for that matter, the history of sugar, which is another important ingredient in tea for many people, is the history of colonization. And Vaidehi, Ahilan, and Geetha riff off from this history of colonization and the place, and they take it to the place that tea holds in our lives and in our worlds. And they probe what it is that tea means today to us, and then how it shapes our everyday lives. So the dedication to the tea plantation workers, I think, is very apt. For many of the drawings and the poems explore the laboring body, as well as the woman's body and the relationship that it has to domestic labor. Now, Ahilan writes in one of his poems, he says, "With her broken body, she wove for the millionth and one time a cup of tea. What color is this? His anger on seeing insipid tea. The various shades of menstrual blood," she said. And accompanying this is this monochromatic drawing. And that there is no hint of red here, that there is no menstrual blood. And yet, this drawing, it reminds me, and then it is a comment on the relationship of the body with its domestic environment, or especially the woman's body with the domestic environment. And there are other bodies which evoke, there are other images which evoke the body and its place also in the natural world. In another poem, Ahilan writes, I just received this book this evening and I'm really excited about it, which is why I'm trying to read from this, not from my notes. "Oh, beautiful hill country, where white hands raise cups of red tinged tea merrily, and leeches feed on earth-hued bodies to fertilize tea leaves. Ahilan takes us by hand and he takes us to the hill country in Sri Lanka, to the tea country. And he reminds us of the colonial history of tea and of the exploitation of plantation workers. You know, he does this elsewhere as well, where he writes about shoulders cut to the bone by wicker baskets and bloodied fingers. The worker's body is a new map traced on the walls of the teacup. In her introduction in the book, Geetha writes about the difficulty of finding a proper cup of tea, a proper cup of chai in Canada. And you know, it is an experience. It is something that many of us have also experienced when we go to places where tea is not drunk as it is in South Asia. And of course, the rituals surrounding the making of the tea and the drinking of the tea are very different. So Geetha's poems, I think, are about the rootedness in time and place that tea creates. They are about memory, they're about cultural memory, and they're about the making of memory and writing. And in the first poem here, she writes about the act of writing, about the aloneness of that act. And she says, I'm writing, you see, in an empty kitchen. The water longing and bubbling over for the tea leaves to seep their hue in. So this is a writerly life that she's talking about, and the kind of, no, I will not call it loneliness, but the aloneness that shapes our words, that shapes our writing. Later in another poem, she writes about the poet becoming poetry, and she says, in the cup's emptiness, she becomes poetry. So Geetha's poems bring to us also the importance of food and memory, and especially memory when it comes to someone who moves between borders. In one of the poems, she writes about puffed rice and tea as it is drunk in Coimbatore. In another of the poems, she writes about the shared memory of domestic labor. She says, those with nothing but memories keep drenching themselves in the steam that curls over black tea gleaming in a cup. Then elsewhere, she talks about the roots of tea and how the roots of tea are swells of memory. So the memory, the act of tea, the act of drinking tea, of making tea, of lingering over tea, all these acts related to tea become acts of memory, of the practice of memory in Geetha's poems. And these poems are also about memories that make us. I'm just going to find you a poem that I would like to share with you. She says, no matter, no, not this one. Where is this one? 87. There we are. To gain the flavor of this rasam specked with pepper and cumin and pulped bits of tomato, how many times would Amma and her Amma have brewed memories of countless rasams, wondering 4 hands rested on the teacups? She's talking here about, not only about the memory of the rasam, but also that shared cultural memory, which comes through rituals of food, through recipes that have been passed on from generation to generation. And of course, again, the domestic labor that goes into it. And again, she's concerned with memory. The last poem that I want to share with you is about Amma's letter. And she says, no matter how many times I dissolve Amma's letter, faded in tamarind chili odor, it keeps surfacing in my tea. What to do? Now the poems and the drawings and the translations, of course, Did they keep nudging the memory? Did they keep, they keep tingling the tongue with different sensations, different layers and flavors? What to do? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gopika, for flagging off most of the things that I guess those of us who had the luxury of taking a look at the book could relate to. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, for a moment, as somebody who is bilingual myself, to be very honest, I read the Tamil ones first because I didn't want the English to. And I mean, those people who are here who know me, you know, I resist reading anything I can read in Tamil in English. You know, it's difficult for me to really get into the English translations of the Tamil works. And for a moment, you know, I was wondering how is it going to work and stuff like that. But I guess it does. The concoction works. And thank you so much. I'm just going to kind of take off from most of the things that Gopika has said before we really move into the panel discussion very, very briefly. But I just want to get back to Vaidehi first, because as a book, as an object that you hold in your hand, which is very, very material, you know, the very sense of holding the book in your hand, I think is highlighted, it's heightened by the drawings, by the paintings and the way they are presented. So to me, that was like primary, that's the entry point, you know, before we really move into, and Gopika clearly pointed out the connection between some of the painting and the poems. Not all of them do that in this book though. So there is nothing illustrative about this book, you know, so there are ways. So Vaidehi, I'm just curious to know, once this project began, you know, was there any shift in your paintings of the teacups? Switch off, unmute yourself.
My experience, three people from different countries with varied cultural experience and identity try to share our thoughts in the form of art and poetry. Here are a viewer, seeing both the paintings and poem alongside, giving a beautiful and new perspective. It is a formal new language. It has formed a very new language. I felt the threads of monotone of the painting are visible in the poem too. Also, it is interesting to ruminate the density and the layers of my works using colors of sepia and black with textures, where it meets commonality in poetry and art. To me, they are three visual reflections of tea.
Thank you. That's so beautifully said, Vaidehi, and it's also produced very well. Now there are the paintings that you have in the book are now available for sales. The material that's used is charcoal, soft pastel, and acrylic on paper. The sizes are manageable and handy for those of us who want to really have it on our walls. It's 11.4 into 10.6 inches and 11.5 into 8.7 inches. Those of you who who are willing and would like to have your own copy of the painting can reach out to Vaidehi. I hope Meera or Vaidehi can type in Vaidehi's contact details on the chat for people to really take it in. That would be wonderful. That would be one way to remember this day with so much affection. Thank you, Vaidehi. I just want to throw a question to both Geetha and Ahilan, which I think formed the crux of Gopika's reading. You know, there is, like Gopika pointed out, Ahilan states off from the colonial history, and Geetha here, she is in the today of where people are spread all over the world, and you think about the global village of sorts, you know, I mean, there is all countries or, you know, there are migrant people of different colors, different races. So how does this autonomy and collectivity work, you know? And this question comes from my experience as theater, which I think is a very collective art. There is no way anyone can be possessive about theater, you know. So I just want to know Ahilan's and Geetha's response to the question of autonomy and collectivity in this project. Ahilan?
Okay,
We are
so
going male first and then ladies second.
no,
Please come. You are a minority here.
not like that, because of talking about the starting point.
Yeah.
So before discussing the thematic of the book, so I would like to share the experiences of the making book or the project first, in very briefly. The long discussion on tea with Vaidehi, especially the domestic aspects of tea making. So my views on tea expand to different spheres, revealing various creative backgrounds of tea. So I would say this is the exact point of takeoff. I share this idea with Vaidehi and Geetha. They also agreed to work towards this book, which came out as a concoction of 3 different reflections of tea. Thank you.
Yeah. Geetha?
Yeah, so what I initially, when the whole thing started, to be honest, I was a little hesitant, thinking how the poems or the project would work or take on its own. And then one thing both Ahilan and I decided, or like we already had it in our mind, I would say simultaneously, is that they should be like short vignettes of glimpses of different aspects of tea. And that's all we had thought. And then it was like after that we didn't discuss poetry, or we didn't even discuss what we wrote about. It was just an organic discussion generally with all of us, like talking about tea, and then it led into memories. And as I was talking to them, I realized that I remember tea through the flavors and the memories that I had experienced in my childhood in different parts of living in different parts of India. And always it contrasted with what I've been living in Toronto for 20 years. So it is this contrast, like how even the words associated with tea, like boiling, simmering, we don't have it here. It's like infusions with peach and strawberry, and it's so different teas that we were talking about. That struck me. I think that was the core of my writing, coupled with women's the domesticity, the domestic labor that goes into the tea making itself.
But I think overall the product really speaks of possibility of having autonomy when you're on the same page, you know, and when you don't have any apprehensions about each other, both in terms of art as well as in terms of ideas to some extent, which I think is very rare to come by. And I really wish you a long journey with this, you know, and I'm sure it will continue because already it is a long journey. Geetha has already translated Ahilan's poems, and also her familiarity with Sri Lankan poetry in general, both for translation as well as in her own poems that comes out, you know. So thank you so much. I just have a few very quick questions, Ahilan. I'm going to just combine the 2 questions that I have because Gopika has already told us about how the hill country of Sri Lanka is your major trope. You know, that's from where the tea comes, and it is the people, it is dedicated to them. But within that, I think you have managed to bring in, you know, for example, the word siratte, translated as coconut shell. But those of you, I don't know whether you know how it looks. You know, so it's a coconut shell with a ladle. It's like a ladle, but yeah, so it is that siratte, which is a symbol of caste, or the poem on menstrual blood, which Gopika also read out to us, you know, and the kind of authority that you have at home when you find your tea insipid and you can actually kind of ask. So I just want to know how, I mean, for you, this whole public domain and terrain of hill country history, and this very, very localized um, gender and caste in your poems.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. So I think I would like to say some common or basic conceptual things before answering your question on caste and gender-based discriminations. So the main ingredients of my tea poems in this volume are the politics of mundanity or everydayness. So in our cultural practices, I found that the mundane activities are more political than the political as it is known commonly. That is the basic concept of all poems. With many faces and social backgrounds and condition, it operates silently to establish the dominance. So with this vision, I was able to review different layers of tea from production to consumption. This led me to talk about the gender, ethnicity, class, caste, nationalism, and marketing forces that shape the contemporary world with a broader perspective, along with some personal experience with memories of tea. These are the main background of the writing. The roots of my tea are from Sri Lanka, as you said. However, to a certain extent, these contours represent the or reflect the whole world of tea and South Asia specific. So yeah, in Sri Lanka, tea in Sri Lanka was a colonial intervention. Already we talked about this, and economy like in many other countries around the world, as we know. So an old singular language folk song describes very scarcely in colonial masters drink human blood when they sow the plain or black tea in first time. For the establishment of tea, also the coffee and coconut and rubber estates, in the colonial era, the British colonizers brought coolies, that also the new term emerged in this period, from Tamil Nadu to Ceylon or present Sri Lanka for plantation work. And also, interestingly, they planted them as a new ethnic group named as the Hill Country Tamils in later phase of the history. Tea, one of the predominant national and international gaze to exhibit the country like Sri Lanka, with the pride in the nation building project of the post-colonial nation state of Sri Lanka as a continuation of colonial Ceylon. The title exists as Alahiya Malayagam, or beautiful hill country, with the plantation workers still living without basic facilities, underpaid, and fighting against ethnic and class issues, etc. Today, the tea become their blood and sorrow for me in my poems. The singular a folk song still reverberates in my mind. And also you mentioned about the poem about the coconut shell of Sirattai. How to containers for the tea symbolize the caste-based discrimination and untouchability. That is rooted in my childhood memories. Here, in the same tea, but the container marked the difference and domination. So, what is the form of tea? A flower engraved Brazilian cup, a spotted gold colored can, more like a cylindrical bottle or a wide mounted coconut shell, said the one chased away to flow. This is that poem. So the following poem draws the parallel between plain and black tea connected to menstrual blood, already mentioned several times and read it all right. This reflects the idea of tea making as a female quote unquote duty in the domestic work and anger and resistance of women against the patriarchal gesture of male. So the gender dimension of tea, I hope Geetha already touched that, and she will talk more about this because many of her poems deal the gender specific issues on tea. So I don't want to read again the poem because that already read by Gopika. So in short, traveling through and with tea is emphasizing and conflicting zones of day-to-dayness in micro and macro levels of culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ahilan. I can see we are kind of racing against time. So Geetha, I'm just going to again club the questions that I wanted to ask you. And Gopika has actually laid out your memory, associations, the personal things. I'll just kind of, I was struck by the temporality and the spatiality of your poems in terms of temporality, which is suggested by that one single reference, of course, of the mother making rasam. That's also there, somewhere 2 generations ago or previous generation. But I'm talking about the Kurundogai lover, in terms of time going back some 23 centuries at least, and the kind of spatiality which comes from various nationalities. Yeah. Unmute.
Yeah. Sorry. In terms of memory, in terms of associations, I'm thinking of tea, like as Ahilan already spoke about the labor aspect, women's labor. There is this 13th century Chinese poetry about young girls plucking tea leaves. And end of the poem, it says that the girls look at each other's basket and see how much leaves they have collected. And end of the poem, it will say like, they don't get to taste that tea. It goes to the governors and then to the traders. As I was thinking about that, it is the same for the women, the domestic women who make umpteen number of cups of tea every day for the visitors, for the husbands, for the household members. The mother that I drew in my poem is actually a metaphor for that woman who has the first cup of tea, which is only that cup of tea that is hers, that is with body and soul. She enjoys that morning cup of tea. Then no matter how many cups of tea she makes during the day, she's not there. It is not her cup of tea. Like it's always for the others because she's rushing through other chores as she's making this tea. Sometimes she wants to make it, and most of the time she doesn't even want to make that tea. So I was all my poems depend on that occasion of that making tea, and also the space associated with that tea. Usually, if it is, I'm talking from my experience, and the women I have seen who make these cups of tea in the kitchen, and the women who like go into the kitchen, helping them, serving the tea, making the tea, and they're all segregated from the men. Most of you may be familiar with that scene where like in the small kitchen, they're all like gathered. Once the tea is out for the men, then the women sit together and there's like these whispers and there's like little conversations, the intimate conversations. There is anger, there is grief, there is everything that goes into that moment. It is so space constructed, like it is that house that gives that privacy of that kitchen, even if it's momentarily. And when I think of the houses now, which is like we have all these open concept houses, the urban living, we don't have that space anymore. It's that intimacy, that those moments are gone. Not that we don't have those conversations. The conversations still happen, but the spaces are different now. So I think of tea with all these memories attached, like how different it is to live in a country here where we still think of that tea, but that specific space or that specific moment doesn't happen the way that we enjoyed in our childhood, or we enjoyed as growing up in a bigger household too. And so when I think of tea, it is this women's body that keeps moving in the production as well as in the making of the tea, not just the production of tea leaves, but also the making of the tea, where I ask in one of the poems, the poet asks, like, how do you begin your morning, with a cup of tea or coffee? My mornings begin, she said, with my body that liquefies hot bread, holding her tea specked with puffed rice. So it is this familial work, that intimacy, the domestic oppression, the violence, everything that comes into the tea that is made and that is being drunk also. And the last thing, I don't want to take too much time. So the last thing I want to end is like how the rootlessness of a diasporic life, always you long for that cup of tea that you have your memories attached to in your home country. South Asians will definitely relate to this. And it is that memory that you feel that cup of tea would bring back those memories and connect your life here, even if it is momentarily. And that is what I try to capture in the following poem. I want to plant my feet that slip and fall again and again in the invisible black film of ice, firmly on the ground to drink tea at least once, you say. silent, I gaze into your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, as much as labor is there, Geetha's poems also have a lot of longing, love, and desire. Vidya, we already have a comment in the question session from Pramila, who has actually complimented the translation and how beautiful it is. And I'm really happy and proud because I've known Vidya from her graduation days, you know, the 5 years to be there. And I've seen her with all her intensities and efforts and you know, the kind of commitment that she has to whatever you do. So Vidya, I'm just going to combine that, you know, that question really asked about how did you really have any difficulty, especially in capturing the lyricism, you know, in terms of rhythm. But I'm just going to also kind of ask you to combine, because you're the one who is connecting the colonial legacy of tea and English. And I'm using English with a small e. So how did you play with it?
Yes. Thank you, Mangai ma'am.
Sorry, Vidya, sorry. May I add to this? Because I think
yes.
you know what Mangai said about English and then the colonial legacy of English, I think resonates very well with the question I want to ask you as well. And I wanted to ask you whether, you know, have you thought through this process of transposing what you read in Tamil to English? And this question comes to me from, you know, what was said earlier about the coconut shell. And you know, and the words that you use to translate it into English. And I'm wondering if keeping the original word would have made the reader think more about what it means and about the associations of is it Sarakai with caste, Sirakai with caste. And you know, so I just want you to nudge you to think more about using Tamil words themselves and using Tamil in your English. And how would you do that, right? I mean, this balance between Tamil and English, this balance between the colonial and the post-colonial.
Right. Thank you for the questions. So I think at the outset, I must admit that, well, translation can be very, very daunting, enjoyable as it is, you know. And while translating short fiction, which I've done before, I think you can afford to take many more liberties to make it conscious, to make it apparent to the reader that they really are reading a translation. But with poetry, I find, this is perhaps because of my personal attachment with poetry as well. With poetry, I find that it's very, you really need to strike a balance because you are delivering poetry into another language, you're translating poetry. So I would really want to strike a balance between the lyricism, but also the fact that this is another world. You're not reading something that has been rendered with the kind of fluency that we would always find perhaps in the English poetry that we read very often, right? This is from another world. This is another picture that I'm presenting, that we are presenting to you. So you know, that is there, that is very apparent as well. And it's definitely, you know, you really do need to kind of balance between these two. And sometimes I've gone with, if I find that it's a little easier to go with the fluent and render it in more fluent language. For example, I will choose poem 28 by Ahilan sir, where it's rendered itself into a very fluent kind of a translation. Tea is a conversation with itself, opening and looking itself in the face. Similarly, one by Geetha ma'am, to read it out, Tea, a poem that burns frozen fingers and penetrates deep to drink the bone's marrow. And these have rendered themselves pretty easily into, or rather with a kind of a fluency, right, that makes it, that perhaps helps with the lyricism. But then there are other, the perfect example of which would be the one where the one chased to the floor really wonders about the form of tea, because even the mentions of the porcelain cup and the golden spouted can really evoke a very, perhaps a stiff upper lipped kind of, you know, a setting where, and the irony is perhaps the fact that we're talking about tea, you know, the English drink. But so when we have this background and then when you have a very ironical kind of a question that is raised by somebody who has been marginalized. And then when you have the word charite, where in fact, the particular phrase is Vaya Gandra Charite. And the thing that came to my mind when I read it was a gaping mouth, something that is really devoid of a kind of a grace and a kind of a beauty that is very often associated with the sophistication or the beauty of any act for that matter. But so this is quite devoid of that. When you say Vaya Gandra Charite, a gaping, something that not very aesthetically pleasing to look at, perhaps asymmetrical kind of a coconut shell. But it definitely presented some difficulties, particularly because I didn't want the reader to be confused by this either, because somebody who's perhaps not too familiar with this in Tamil may not exactly get, what a gaping shell would be. So I had to take a conscious choice when I presented it, as the way I did. So I think that kind of a choice, which sometimes may be a bit of a compromise, but then you're always kind of prepared for that when you translate. There really is no perfect translation that you ever can make. So that was something that I was kind of facing. And another thing that I would also like to record is the fact that these translations have been, it was sheer joy to work on these, particularly because of the form, such short poems. I think particularly the ones in the case of Ahilan sir's poems really were pretty imagist-like, so, and somewhere a haiku kind of a format was also running in the background, I felt. So the imagery and the terseness of it and its ability to capture certain mood and the way memory haunts one or the snippet that is presented out of life. So all of these things kind of dip and emerge from the crucible of the teacup. And when, you have this notion of tea really kind of informs and becomes a kind of a receptacle for everything that's washing over your mind as you're translating. And I find that the entire process of translation itself has been very creative. It's not just a skill, because you really, sometimes it is very poetic as well, I would like to say, especially in the case of these poems. So of course, there were issues with trying to communicate the rhythm and the musicality, as Ms. Pramila has asked. I have tried to retain the lyricism where possible. And in other cases, I have also tried to kind of nudge the reader into exploring a world that is definitely different from the fluent English that we come across in a lot of poems written in English. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Vidya.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. The more we push English, we can play with English a lot more.
Definitely.
So
very much.
Yeah, but I can understand that you need to take a call, each time. Thanks, Indran. Indran has already begun with almost a poem, which really talks about how there are many kinds of teas, Japanese, Ceylon tea, everything. But then here we are drinking from plastic tea, while the powers that be are drinking blood. Thanks so much. And he actually has begun the discussion, and I think we'll just take at least 3-4 questions. So Indran's question is about how did you really get to this concept of Murangalin Kalavai, the concoction of dissonance. So either Geetha or Ahilan, if you could take that question.
Yeah, I can answer that question. So as we went through the discussions, as we discussed about tea, we realized we were talking about so many multiple worlds, all different worlds. And there was like human relationships tied into it. And when we talk about human relations, we talk about emotions. Then again is the political and the personal, which is all like they meet and they don't meet. They deviate and they meet. They're like there's this constant threads running parallel and not running parallel together too. So that's why we thought when we talk about tea, it's 3 different dimensions or 3 different people we are talking about tea, and it is not the same. Vaidehi's art takes on a different plane. Ahilan's poems take on a different plane, and my poems take on a completely different plane. So that's why we thought that it made more sense to have this, because tea itself invokes all these different multiple worlds and perspectives brewing in one cup. So that's how we thought of the title. And the word concoction, yes, especially because living here, I knew the words that is being attached to tea as well as the experience. Because in North America, tea is like a meditative thing. It's like a very privileged, a very relaxing, you know, like it's Japanese, it's Zen and all that. But for us South Asians, it's everything.
Yeah, I'm moving on to the next question. Ahilan, you can come in later, I think. The next is to Vaidehi. I hope you're there. So Vaidehi, the question is about, did you follow the drawings of Vaidehi to write a poem, or did Vaidehi read your poems to create the drawings? I mean, I'm just beginning. It's Vaidehi's painting that actually started off the whole process. And then there was, of course, back and forth, you know, but I think the question has this poignant line about, I hope it would make sense to talk about it in this time of separation, about working together. Thank you, Jasmine. Vaidehi? Vaidehi, you also have the next question to you from Sai Rakshaya Saumya. What is the reason behind the use of monochromatic colors for the illustration? I wouldn't call it illustration though. Is it a choice to bring out the earthiness and domesticity of the drink? Yeah. Is Vaidehi there in our Zoom link? Or is she having difficulty because she signed in with two? Ahilan, do you want to take that question? If she's joining, we will see her. Yeah. Unmute, unmute. Unmute, Ahilan. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
So actually, Vaidehi only responds to this question because that is the artist's choice. Why she uses monocolor or multicolor, or why charcoal for this, why pastel for this actually. So I am so sorry not to respond because that is the decision and choice of the artist.
Yeah, but I don't think all the paintings are monochromatic colors. There are variations.
Yes.
Yeah.
And regarding the other question, if I can jump in for a moment, nobody actually followed others' art or poetry. We actually did not exchange anything in that sense. We just had like discussions. We just spoke about tea and we did our own work. It was only towards the end that when we felt that we finished it and we are complete with it, that we sent the work to the translator and Priya showed us the artwork. And then we realized there were like common threads that just came out of probably from our discussions.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add that on my end, there's been quite a bit of inspiration that I've taken from this project. And reading all of these poems actually led me to write my own coconut tree poems, a set of 20 poems inspired by this and in a very similar style and you know, kind of
and Vidya,
size.
You should say you're from Nagarkoil. And how much?
I'm from Nagarkoil in Kanyakumari, which is very close to Kerala and was part of Kerala. And we have, in fact, the time I was writing the coconut tree poems, I could literally see in all four directions. You know, so you're confronted by it, and I realized, okay, the time is ripe to write a poem about these.
It's really interesting because you know, in some ways, I think Tamil poetry draws a lot from the landscape around us. You know, the word Thinai or
exactly.
Ecoscape, if you can translate it like that. And A.K. Ramanujam has actually introduced it to the rest of the world, and many of us are inspired by it. So I'm so glad, Vidya, that somewhere it is the landscape that really determines. Yeah. Vaidehi, do you want to take the question? Why did you
sorry, I lost my connection. Sorry. The thing is, I have used sepia and monotone colors to add the depth to the concept. Certain places I find it more easy if it will be more, you know, depthful and more interesting to create like that. That's the reason I have used single monotone colors.
Yeah. Great. Are there Any more questions? I mean, contrary to all my fears, I think we've done quite well with time, so. Meera, can we bring the event to a close?
Before that, I would like to thank both Mangai and Gopika for initiating this beautiful conversation. Mangai, you put it like spot on, and Gopika, your comments were so, it was like you took out the threads bare from the collection we did.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It was, I was so excited to just receive this evening. And, I was like, okay, I'll have this as I'm talking about it. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you both.
Thank you,
Meera.
Ms. Gopika. Thank you, Mangai ma'am. It was an absolute pleasure. Felt like being back in your classes after very long, and I enjoyed every bit of it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think just the right day for this book. And I think the book will travel and have many more readings. And thanks so much for all of you for having joined us today. There are many poets, there are academicians, there are friends of so many of us from the diaspora, from Sri Lanka, from India. So I think it's truly international in terms of its reach. Thanks, Prakriti, for bringing us all together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
everyone.
Have a nice.
Thank you, Meera and Harish as well. And thank you, Prakriti.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the attendees who were here and supporting us.
Thank you, everyone,
Attendees
once
come on
again.
video, Harish.